Director of the Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center, Dr. Louis Weiner.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for coming for this extraordinary event. My name is Dr. Louis Weiner, and I direct the Georgetown Lombardi Comprehensive Cancer Center and our clinical service line, the MedStar Georgetown Cancer Institute. And we're incredibly excited this afternoon to be hosting the celebration of the inaugural Edward M. Kovach Cura Personalis lecture. We're here to celebrate his legacy. He was connected to Georgetown in so many ways, and we're honored by this opportunity to carry forward the legacy in a way that I believe he would be very approving. We're thrilled to be joined by other members of his family, including his wife of 56 years, Kathleen. Where are you, Kathleen? There you are. And of course, we're deeply honored to be joined this afternoon by Katie Couric, who we will hear from shortly. And also, we'll have Joe Krebs here as well. So this lecture really reflects something that's really important about Georgetown. When I moved here almost 12 years ago, I was really struck by the fact that the slogan I heard, Cura Personalis, wasn't a slogan, care of the entire person. It was really a reflection of the mission statement of the Cancer Center, of the Medical Center, and of the university. And so we don't approach people at Georgetown as diseases attached to a name and a medical record number. We really think about the patient with a cancer as a person, and as a person with a family, person embedded in a community, and we find it necessary and appropriate to deal with that in everything we do. I make occasional rounds of our infusion center once or twice a month to say hello to our patients and thank them for putting their faith in us. And when I do that, I'm struck by the fact that everybody I talk to, everybody, is so appreciative of the personal attention they get from the doctors, the nurses, and the staff at Lombardi and in the infusion center. And, we're here to cure cancer, make no mistake about it. But I couldn't be prouder of the fact that when we try to cure cancer, we do it by keeping the patient first, putting them first, and making sure that we're attentive to all their needs and not just killing the malignant cells. So that's what we're about. And tonight's, it says here, I'm supposed to call this a lecture. It's not a lecture, it's a conversation. This conversation that you're going to hear tonight really exemplifies the importance that we place on communication, the importance that we place on dealing with our patients and their families as really integral partners in the fight against cancer. And I think you're going to hear some wonderful thoughts and concepts from our panelists tonight. Now, what I'd like to do is to invite one of Ed's 5 wonderful children, Alex Kovach, to the stage. Where are you, Alex? There she is. We're going to hear more about her father and the motivations behind this wonderful event. And so looking forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Weiner. And on behalf of my entire family, I thank each one of you for coming this evening. We are thrilled to have Katie Couric here to kick off this series with her dynamic personality and her dedication to cancer awareness. When my dad was in the care of his amazing, inspiring, and talented cancer team at Georgetown, we wanted to think of a way to thank them and to create a legacy for him at the university that meant so much to him. Over some time, and also in discussions with my dad, we came up with this lecture series, which will always be focused on caregiving and its importance in the medical treatment of patients, treatment as people, and not just patients. When his doctors would take an extra moment, even just 30 seconds in some cases, to listen to my dad telling how his week was, his round of golf, his latest woodworking project, building a lute or carving a wooden spoon, it would literally change his entire attitude and how he physically responded to his treatment at the time. Sometimes, once cancer is diagnosed, medical professionals might forget their patients are people, in this case, a loving husband, engaged father, thoughtful lawyer, frustrated golfer, meticulous woodworker, enthusiastic musician, and a world traveler. And all these wonderful human aspects of each patient's life are part of and assist in the treatment of the illness. My dad was very fortunate that he had lived an incredibly full life of almost 80 years when he was diagnosed, but the last thing he wanted was to be solely defined by his cancer. The focus of this lecture series is to remind all of us, professionals and patients, that taking care of and communicating with each other as human beings is at the core of all medical care. We also want to honor and recognize excellence when it comes to getting this right. As I mentioned, my dad loved woodworking, and his greatest gifts were always handmade. He expressed his gratitude in the most personal and thoughtful way possible. Very often, it was in the simplicity of a hand-carved wooden spoon. Indirectly, I suppose, an homage to caregiving and nourishment for both the body and the soul. So today, we would like to honor Dr. Marshall with the inaugural Edward M. Kovach Cura Personalis Award for his excellent and ethical medical care, as he is someone who truly exemplifies Cura Personalis. My mom, Kathleen, will present Dr. Marshall with this wooden spoon award.
Come on, we should. Listen, wait a minute. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Alex. When I was a kid, I was always warned I was going to get the spoon if I did something wrong. I guess there's another way of thinking about it now. Now I have the honor of introducing you to someone who really needs no introduction to anybody who has lived in D.C. for long enough, and that's Joe Krebs. He's a beloved local news personality, and he retired from the NBC4 family in 2012 after 32 years at the station. His work spanned topics that impact the D.C. region, the nation, and the world. He was a familiar face in the homes of many people here, of course. He originally earned his law degree from St. Louis University, and he's a former assistant prosecuting attorney for St. Louis County, Missouri. So he's a man with some critical thinking skills. He's won multiple awards for his work in journalism, including several local Emmys. In his retirement, he is an avid cyclist and world traveler, and maybe he'll tell us if he's also a woodworker. We're lucky to have him here tonight to hear a bit more about his personal experience with cancer. Welcome to the stage, Joe Krebs.
Thanks, Doctor, very much. And first of all, I want to thank Alex and the entire Kovach family for this most generous gift. Alex, Kathleen, and the entire family for choosing to focus on this remarkable concept of Cura Personalis, and for choosing for this inaugural talk to talk about the healing power of communication. Communication. For a person diagnosed with cancer, it is the life-saving hand reaching out to help when you feel like you're drowning. When I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in July of 2017, I was stunned, stupefied, terrified. I was lost. My head was spinning. What now? What next? Am I really about to die? And then I had my first meeting with Dr. Marshall. After saying hello, his first words to me were, "What do you love to do?" What do I love to do? I'm thinking, wow, that's a big question. But I said, well, I like to swim, I like to bike, I like to hike, I like to read, I like to spend time with my family, I like to travel. And he said, a cancer diagnosis can take over your life. Don't let it. We'll fight the cancer. You Don't forget to live. Do what you love. He understood. He got it. He knew where I was, and his words were a lifesaver. Those words have become my guidepost. Don't forget to live. Do what you love. And then he looked at my wife, Mary Lynn, and said, I know what it's like to sit where you're sitting. I've been there. And he explained how he, the doctor, became the caregiver when his wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. Mary Lynn and I both knew then that he knew. We could relax and take on whatever challenges we had to face. We felt Cura Personalis in action. We felt that care for the entire person. John Marshall decided to become a doctor when, at the age of 14, he lost his mother to cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He did that. He became a doctor and a whole lot more. Dr. Marshall is now recognized around the world as a leader in research and development for drugs for gastrointestinal cancers. He's the principal investigator for more than 150 clinical trials. He now has lots of titles: Associate Director for Clinical Care here at the Lombardi Center, Chief of the Division of Hematology and Oncology here at Georgetown University Hospital, and the founding director of the Otto J. Rusch Center for the Cure of GI Cancers. But beyond all that and above all that, he has remained a caregiver. It is his deep caring for patients, his personal touch, and his gentle humor. He once told me, actually on the eve of chemotherapy, he said, "Chemo, you're gonna love it." And in fact, it actually turned out to be not as bad as I had feared. So all of that, this personal touch, this humor, the obvious caring, have forged life-saving, life-giving, life-affirming relationships with many of us who are on a tough, tough journey. And Dr. Marshall is going to be joined momentarily by someone else who is a caregiver, someone else who has a profound and personal connection with this disease and who cares deeply for those who are fighting it. I've had the privilege of knowing Katie Couric since she was called Catherine on the air. We were both new reporters back at NBC4 here in Washington back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, when she annually and graciously bought from my daughters box after box of Girl Scout cookies. She was then and is now one of the realest people I know. What you see is what you get. Authentic, no airs. Always smart, sharp, funny, interesting, interested, concerned. I knew her when she was dating Jay, when they got married, when they had kids. I saw her amazing strength when he got sick and when together they battled. And after they lost that battle, I saw her fight for the right and the need for more people to get colonoscopies, for insurance to cover those screenings, activism that led her to co-founding Stand Up to Cancer. She's had a remarkable broadcasting and journalism career from NBC4 to NBC News to 15 years co-anchoring the Today Show to the first woman to solo anchor the CBS Evening News. She is the winner of many journalism awards, including a Peabody, 2 Edward R. Murrows, a Walter Cronkite, and several Emmys. And she has not stopped her search for truth and her quest to enlighten. She's now the founder of KCM, Katie Couric Media, which produces documentaries and podcasts and even a daily wake-up call newsletter. So to begin this conversation on the healing power of conversation, please welcome Katie Couric and Dr. John Marshall.
You are there, yes. Joe, thank you very much
He read it just like I wrote it.
Oh, that was good. By the way, that's a new title he gave me, Dr. Weiner. Yeah, add that to the list. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, wow, thank you all for braving the rain and joining us today. We've been very excited. We've been trying to get this woman here a long time. In fact, she is one of only 10 Luminary Award winners. Our center gives out awards each year to people who have made Lifetime Achievement Awards in the space of GI cancers. And Katie's got another lifetime yet to live, but she already has her Lumi, as they say. She added to all those other awards, Joe. So we're glad that she could come when she couldn't come the first time to receive that award. So we're so excited that she's joined us. It's not about me, it's about you. You've been in the news business a long time. How'd that happen? Where'd that start?
Oh, wow. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming. And I just want to say how honored I am to be the first, the inaugural speaker for this incredible series, and to say hello to the Kovach family. And thank you for inviting me. By the way, I just wanted to also mention I'm from Arlington, Virginia.
You are.
So this is like coming home. Woo! This is like coming home for me. I have so many connections still in the DC area. Of course, as Joe mentioned, I was a local reporter, but I grew up right across Chain Bridge, and my late husband Jay, went to Georgetown Law School and worked for Williams & Conley, which was a big Georgetown law firm, because Edward Bennett Williams, I guess, is a big Georgetown alum.
Can I tell where I met you?
Oh yeah, go ahead. It's a funny story.
I was a resident at Arlington Hospital.
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. You were the war correspondent for the Gulf War in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And we were on TV all the time, and I was watching, and the nurses were there, and I said, she is really cute. and so I was in the call room, and I get this stat page. Your mother happened to be in the ICU. And I get a stat page to your mother's room, and I turned the corner breathless, and you stood and said, so, I hear you think I'm cute.
Not exactly an emergency situation.
And I would have to say that however many years ago that was, it is still true. It was
Thank you.
very true. So when I got the chance to, I'm in. So my wife, the survivor, is out there somewhere. So.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah. This news business stuff, how do you run into that?
How do you
get into it?
How do I get into? Well, gosh, Joe and I are veterans, and we started many, many years ago. The news business has changed so dramatically since I graduated from college and got into the business in excuse me. No, I don't care. I'm 62. I know, crazy. Joe, I know, I look pretty good, right? So I'm kidding. So I got into the news business in the early 80s, and it's breathtaking how much it's changed through the years. And there were only 3 major networks back then, and cable news had just started. I was one of the first employees of CNN, which back then they called chicken noodle news. Mm-hmm. But it was a really natural career choice for me. My dad was a print reporter for the Atlanta Constitution. He covered politics. He worked first for the Macon Telegraph because he went to college at Mercer. He was from Dublin, Georgia, and just an incredibly smart, erudite man. And I think because of my personality, I'm pretty extroverted, if you haven't been able to tell that, and love people. I'm very insatiably curious, and I think I've always loved to write, and I'm a master procrastinator. I was always, doing my homework in front of the front door, waiting for the bus to come.
Does that work well with the news business?
It did. It trained me really well because I can write quickly, and I like to work under pressure. I'm an adrenaline junkie. Yeah. My husband makes fun of me. I got remarried 5 years ago, but we'll have half an hour to get ready for something, and of course I'll just lounge around until I have 10 minutes because I like to feel pressure to do things. So it was just a natural thing for me to get into journalism, and I worked in radio in Washington. I actually worked at WMAL as an intern. I worked at WAVA. Is that still around, the all news radio?
No.
Oh, Jesus. Anyway, I worked at WAVA, and then I worked at one other when Eddie Gallagher was there, the Joy Boys. I am so old, by the way. But I worked at different radio stations, and I realized after I graduated, I went to the University of Virginia.
Wahoo wah.
Yeah, hello. Is anybody from UVA
Yeah, there
here?
are a few. Yeah, I know.
Oh, I'm sorry, because you all could enjoy being national champions in basketball and lacrosse this year if you had gone to UVA. But anyway.
You're at Georgetown.
Yeah,
See,
I know.
okay.
Sorry.
All right.
My daughter Ellie is engaged, by the way, and she's married. She met her fiance. They were both at Yale together. And of course, UVA played Yale in lacrosse, and her fiance was on the Yale lacrosse team. So we had an engagement party for them over the weekend, and as a welcome to the family present, I gave them an NCAA UVA lacrosse shirt, which went over like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
But anyway, so where were we?
Let's fast forward a little
Sorry.
bit. But we digress. So the meteoric rise from local news to the National Bureau Chief for the DOD or in the Pentagon, and then like in a flash, you're the head of the Today Show. You're running, and you did that for what?
Well, I wouldn't say I was the head of the Today Show.
You ran the whole thing. The Today Show, yeah.
People aren't supposed to know that,
Okay.
John. Yeah, well, I was very lucky. I benefited from a lot of, these morning shows. There's always turmoil behind the scenes, it seems. I think because people feel so familial watching the people who are on television. They see them go through many life changes. They see them pregnant and having babies. They watched as Jay dealt with colon cancer. And I think as a result, people become very invested. And I benefited.
More than that. I mean, because you were every woman. You were such an impact on America.
Well, I think it was because that seat has, especially back then, I think a little less so today, where people can get their news and information through such a panoply of options, your phone. Joe and I were talking about that. A TV audience just watched the evening newscasts, and you'll see ads for Doxadan, I've fallen and I can't get up, and adult diapers, and you pretty much know what the average demographic of the audience is. I used to get so excited when I was doing the CBS Evening News. If it was like a shampoo commercial, I'd be like, oh, yay! Somebody under 50 might be watching. Or vitamins that weren't like 50 plus vitamins. True. But so I think that because that role was so influential, and I was thinking about it even when I was in my 20s, before I got the job on the Today Show, and I was working in local news or at CNN. You turned on morning news at 7 o'clock, or you listened to WMAL or NPR, and now, as I said, you have so many options. But I was just very lucky because they had I don't know if you all remember, a lot of you are too young, but a behind the scenes with Deborah Norville and Jane Pauley, and the show was going through a difficult time, and I was really the beneficiary of that behind the scene drama. That's not to say I didn't think I was eminently qualified, because women always tend to say, oh, I was lucky, it was good timing. I do think I'm good at what I do, but I also think I was lucky to be at the right place at the right time as well.
We promised no Matt Lauer questions. You got
you
so
can
many.
Ask, you
no,
can
no,
ask.
I'll leave that to.
Okay.
So you've won so many awards, and you've interviewed so many people that in many ways have been transformative. Do any of them stand out? And this is sort of your pre-cancer life, before you sort of changed. I mean, are there things that struck you during those days where it just really influenced you?
I mean, I think precisely because I had a front seat to history, that I was able to cover everything from the recount in 2000 to interviewing Ross Perot, who was very pugnacious and said, Katie, 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 and accused me of trying to prove my manhood because I asked him tough questions. Yeah. Anyway, but and also...
Each one has a picture of a softball right next to it here.
The Oklahoma City bombing, which was the biggest act of domestic terrorism before, 9/11, of course, was an incredibly important story for me to cover, not only that terrible day where I felt the weight and so much responsibility to get information to people, at the same time being personally terrified myself. I remember calling my mom and dad during a commercial because of the Pentagon, and I really did feel like I was in some kind of Orson Welles movie, that the world was coming to an end. You didn't know how many planes had been hijacked, what was going on. I told them to get in the basement. I mean, it was just like, I was shaking like a leaf behind the scene, but I really had to do everything I could to keep it together. I've covered many school shootings, which have had an incredible impact on me, Columbine and Sandy Hook. I've become friendly with people who were victims of those shootings or family members of victims. Mark Barden is a very good friend of mine from Newtown, and that really prompted me to do a documentary about gun violence called Under the Gun that came out in 2016. That is so relevant now, given what happened in Dayton and El Paso and California before that. And so, you know, I think I think because of my cancer advocacy and partly because of all the years I've spent in television, I feel more comfortable advocating for certain positions like stricter gun laws and sensible gun laws, which I think are so sorely needed in this country, as well as obviously supporting cancer research. And, you know, I've done documentaries. I did a documentary about what it's like to be a transgender person and how our changing notion of gender identity, and to try to help people understand that, the biological roots of that and sort of the sociological aspect of it. I remember Dr. Oz, who I don't often quote, who said, when I talked to him about this documentary, he said, it's hard to hate up close. And I think we've lost our ability to kind of deeply personalize some of these really important stories. That's why actually on my Instagram feed right now, I'm profiling all the victims of these shootings, because somehow in all the politics and the back and forth and the finger pointing, which in some cases I think is legitimate, we lose sight of the people who've lost their lives and the people who are doing something as simple as going to Walmart to get school supplies after, you know, I mean, and so to read these profiles, I think it helps people understand why something needs to be done about this problem.
Yeah, we were talking backstage about how the world is crazy right now, and maybe cancer is easier to talk about than all of that stuff.
Yeah,
a little
maybe.
bit. Well, let's spend a little time talking about that impact on your life. The next time, I mean, you were in everybody's lives. You were reading us and teaching us about the world, and then Jay is diagnosed. And sort of the next time you were in my life, we had some discussions offline about that, and I know you got the best care. And I know you fought an incredible battle together. Your reaction to that in the end has been not to run away or hide, but to run right into the middle of the fire. The effort that you put forward on the Colorectal Cancer Research Alliance, the huge impact of Stand Up to Cancer. I know your advocacy in GI cancers in particular has meant very much to me and so many people in this audience. Can you talk a little bit about taking that Jay's experience, your all's experience as a family, and turning that into what you've turned it into?
Yeah, well, you know, it was a terrible shock. I think, you know, many people who undergo a cancer diagnosis, and of course I know with your wife it was the same way, it's shattering. And Jay was 41 years old. Our daughters were 5 and 1, Ellie and Carrie, and it completely came out of the blue. I mean, hindsight being 20/20, I do, and having really gotten such an education in this disease, I realize now that there were probably some symptoms. Of course, I blame myself for not making Jay go to the doctor. There's so many men, I think, because women go to the OBGYN and they get sort of, they're part of the medical system, but it's shocking to me how many men don't go for physicals, especially younger men who think they're sort of infallible and that they don't have to worry about their health.
Well, and young people don't get colon cancer, right?
Right. Well, except for now, we'll discuss the number of young people is rising in a very alarming way. But it was just terrible. And after 9 months of trying desperately to figure out even something that would manage his disease, that would keep it at bay until something exciting would happen, he lost his battle, and it was
quick.
It was devastating. Yeah, I mean, I'm writing a book about my life, and so I'm revisiting some of the key people that I've met along the way. And I had a drink actually with his 2 doctors, and told them how guilty I felt about so many things, about Jay's illness, the fact that we never really discussed even entertained the idea that he might die, because I was so afraid to give up hope and to make him give up hope that we never discussed the alternative, which I really regret. He never wrote a letter to our girls, or, the closest we came was when we were at our house in upstate New York, and I said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to come here if you're not with me.
Right.
And he said, well, I just hope it'll be full of happy memories. And that's the closest we got.
Yeah.
And
But so much of what we do is the same as what, as oncologists, we're charged with also trying to maintain that hope. And part of this event is to improve that, to teach us about knowing how to manage both maintaining hope, but that sort of reality check of what you got. Many of our allied professionals, other physicians that aren't oncologists who take care of our patients, are often, I would say, upset with us, thinking that we haven't done our job, that we haven't done the discussing that we should be doing. And because as soon as we enter that world, we can see the light go out a little bit, and we don't like doing that. And so the balance of being on point and brutal, if you will, and factual, versus that maintainer of hope is a dance that we have to do as well. So that,
well, I told John that I was going to ask him some questions. So
yeah, she didn't ask. She told John that.
But I mean, how do you do that? Because I think that must be a dilemma. I think there are probably some physicians here today and some family members who also have had these experiences. And how do you balance being realistic and honest with a patient and his or her family, and yet having hope and not taking away every ounce of hope that they have?
Yeah. I mean, there's no one formula. As you know, if you're interviewing somebody, you read them and you have some ideas and information you want to exchange, but it really comes down to reading the person in front of you and what do they need to know right now? Are they making a decision that's silly because they're not getting it? Versus what do they have to know overall and the like. And you hope that you have longer than 9 months to develop that relationship. So there are a lot of times on first visits when we have to tell a patient, and we're the first one that has to tell a patient that they're not going to survive from this illness. And that's sometimes they'll embrace that and drill down on that, but sometimes they will say, oh no, I'll trust in the Lord, or you'll figure something out, or they'll
get angry.
They'll get angry and push back on that and develop their own defenses so they don't have to deal with that. And so you kind of put that on the side, but you're going to have to deal with that later. So it's an ongoing discussion.
In the last 20 years, that with the development with new and exciting therapies, personalized medicine or targeted therapies or immunotherapy, et cetera, that it's not as dire because at least there are options to try to extend life?
It might be as dire. That's the point. But that sense of hope, when you have stories of patients who were literally dying in the next week, who got one of these new immune therapies and rises and is fine now 2-3 years later. If you're a patient and you hear that, you can't help but believe that could be you.
Right.
Even though we tell you it can't be or we don't think it's going to be, you can't help but hope that would be you. When Alex Trebek tweets that he's almost in remission with pancreas cancer, you can't imagine most people would say, oh, that's a positive message. Well, really, it cost us all a huge amount of time of saying, no, that's not really the case, and all of that. So the messaging is out there, too, about hope that we have to come back and level set.
Yeah, I was a little upset about that, although obviously
we want him, wish him well, right?
Wish him, of course, but it is hard when people hear things or read things and then they get this false hope. But it's such a balancing act. And I think for me, I probably erred on the other side and ended up trying to protect Jay from the information that honestly he had a right to hear and probably should have heard. But interestingly enough, for an incredibly brilliant person who himself was very curious about the world and about almost every subject, he actually didn't seem to want to know. So I was sort of managing this and protecting him and giving him information, sort of titrating the kind of information he would receive. And I'll always kind of second guess how I handled that. But
You're taking all of that emotional energy, and you have, talk about a catalyst. You have taken your position in society and your energy and your brains and everything else, and just trying to keep up with you. So you started around GI cancer advocacy. Your sister Emily, unfortunately, then gets pancreas cancer. You flip that into a big New York City gala. Then all of a sudden, Stand Up to Cancer, which in my opinion has been a transformative funding for cancer research, because there's so little money now in our government for cancer research. We had to come up with novel ways of generating it.
Right.
And you took your friends and your gang and said, we're going to change all of this. Can you just talk about that? Again, meteoric rise in the space of cancer.
Well, it started with my work with colon cancer advocacy because, when Jay was diagnosed, and even today, although I think it's gotten much better, people didn't really talk about colon cancer. I think they did when President Reagan had some polyps. But it wasn't something, it's interesting if you read The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee, which is the history of cancer, which won a Pulitzer Prize. It's such an incredible book.
Required reading for all our fellows.
Yeah, it's such an incredible book. But, back in the 50s, I think the New York Times wouldn't let people advertise about a breast cancer support group. They said you'd have to say cancer of the chest cavity, which was so interesting. And of course, now breast cancer, with all the advocacy efforts, has become such an open topic for people. But colon cancer at the time, colorectal cancer, just wasn't discussed in polite conversation.
And then there was a very, very famous colonoscopy.
Yeah. I think that was such a no-brainer for me because after Jay died, I had learned so much. I'd gotten an instant education about colon cancer and learned so much that it's the second leading cancer killer of men and women combined, that it has a 90% cure rate if it's detected early, right, with proper screening. Sure. And I thought it would be almost criminal for me not to share all that I had learned and all that Jay had endured with this national audience of millions of people. I thought, think of the lives I could potentially save. And I wanted to share the education I'd gotten with people who were watching the Today Show.
You got to have been a bit nervous. I mean, because they actually filmed your prep, the outside the bathroom part of your prep.
I felt so strongly about this, and it just seemed so natural, honestly, for who I was and the relationship I had with the audience. Jeff Zucker, who had been our executive producer, had colon cancer at the age of, I believe, 33. So when I suggested this to him, he said, yeah, let's do it. And I just wanted to destigmatize the disease and demystify the procedure.
So still
and what people didn't see, by the way, Dr. Marshall, when with my last, chugging my last glass of prep, the weirdly named Go Lightly.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's nothing that, anyway. So I
have the secret to that.
What? No,
Rum is a clear liquid. So
seriously?
Yeah, you get the pina colada Go Lightly with a little
true?
rum, and it's the greatest night ever.
Is that no?
Don't do that.
Kidding?
Don't do that.
He's kidding.
Don't.
I was so
do
excited because I'm due for another one. I chewed tropical fruit lifesavers.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, John LePuc, suggested that. But the last big glass of New Lightly or Go Lightly that I drank, you didn't see on the Today Show is I threw it up all over my kitchen floor. And I said to the cameraman, destroy that tape.
Since that moment, still to this day, I'll go to a cocktail party, I'll go somewhere and people will ask me, do I really have to go to colonoscopy? And I will say yes. And they said, and they'll say, oh, like Katie did, and it's still yours.
Really?
You own it, right?
Well, Dr. Ford, unfortunately, Ken Ford, who was a wonderful man, he recently passed away. He did my colonoscopy for me on television. And what was so interesting, just as sort of parenthetically, is a number of people said how much they appreciated that I had an African-American doctor perform my colonoscopy. And I said, I never really thought about it. And they said it was such an important thing for people to see a black doctor doing this and doing, speaking so well about the importance of getting screened, which I thought was interesting. But we did have a 20% increase in colon cancer screening. They called it the Couric Effect, which I felt good about. And it's so funny because now a lot of my friends who are doctors, who are GI doctors, say when it says referred by, a lot of people write Katie Couric.
Well, we are plenty busy over there. And because, at the Cancer Center, because of your impact, we are all very glad not to be seeing those patients. So thank you very much for the Couric Effect. It's.
I always say, you guys are you all are probably driving a lot nicer cars because.
Oh no! He pays me, so no. I have a Hyundai. I have a Tucson Hyundai. 7 years old, down in the basement of this building. So, okay, so you bumped 20%. What's your next trick? You got something else that we're gonna...
So then, then I started the NCCRA, the National Colorectal Cancer Research Alliance, bringing colon cancer experts from all around the country. John, I know you know a lot of them, Bernard Levin and Bob Mayer from Mass General, and Bert Vogelstein from Johns Hopkins, who's brilliant, discovered the Ashkenazi Jew gene, and all sorts of people, and we brought them together, and I actually raised a lot of money to support their work. But then suddenly I started thinking, I really care about people's colons, but I care about people in general, and I want to help with all kinds of cancers. So many are underfunded and don't get enough attention, these orphan cancers, all kinds that really need to be better understood. And you mentioned research dollars. I mean, I think it's staggering that only 1 in 10 promising research proposals is funded by the NCI or by NIH.
A little lower than that, right?
And that really, is it lower than that?
7%.
I mean, that to me is just ridiculous. And that's why I thought we have to actually take up the slack and support cancer scientists, clinicians, doctors, who I think are the unsung heroes of our society. So thank you for all the work.
Well, one of the things we're doing here at the Rouge Center is exactly that, is trying to, we're in a hurry, and we need to take some risks. And a lot of time, traditional drug development, traditional research is too slow. We need that.
Right.
We need the base, don't get me wrong, but we also need to take risks. And so the money we raise and invest at the Rouge Center here through Georgetown and throughout the country is really trying to seed that and spark that, in our case, in GI cancers.
Right.
But it's the point being is that we need novel mechanisms
and one of the
to make
things,
change.
and I don't know if you all are doing this, I think you are. I know Lou and I were talking about his work with Stand Up to Cancer. The whole premise of Stand Up to Cancer is focused on collaboration versus competition. So we work with some 1,600 scientists from 180 institutions. We've contributed to the development of 180 different clinical trials. We actually mandate that they work together, that they get along, that they share their brain power and their wisdom and their tissue samples. And we think that it will actually move the needle when it comes to coming up with better, more effective treatments for a whole variety of cancers. We put them on a tight time schedule. They have to have clinical trials in a certain period of time. Phil Sharp, the Nobel laureate from MIT, is head of our scientific advisory board. We work with the American Association of Cancer Researchers. And basically, we've contributed to 5 new FDA-approved cancer drugs, our work, and we've raised over $600 million in 10 years. So we're really proud of what we've done.
Well done.
And let me just add, it was started by 9 women who were frustrated. Really, I think it's pretty remarkable. Sherry Lansing, Laura Ziskin, who was a well-known Hollywood producer who did Spider-Man, who sadly passed away from breast cancer, and other women in marketing and all kinds of fields under the auspices of the Entertainment Industry Foundation, we said, we're sick and tired of it being such a slow process. We have to do something to support cancer scientists. And lo and behold, I mean, it's just amazing. I go to our television specials. You know, we raise money every 2 years on television, but a lot we get from corporate donors. And I look around and I'm like, holy cow, look what we've done. It's so moving and inspiring. And I think it does show what Margaret Mead said, you know, never underestimate the power of I always misquote her, but the power of a few individuals to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And so I'm really, really proud of what we've been able to do.
No, it's unbelievable. And keep going. Don't slow down.
Okay.
We promised to talk a little bit about communications, and we want to spend some time sort of discussing this. I am rarely intimidated in front of an audience, but when I'm charged to interview a professional interviewer, that's
You're doing great.
Yeah, okay. They'll give me the hook if not. But let's talk a little bit about cancer as a team sport, if you will, and the Monahan Center, and sort of the need to create sort of overlays to help communication within cancer. You know, we have surgeons and GI and oncologists and radiation and all this different group, and all the messaging can go over people's heads. Can you reflect a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, you know, I started after Jay passed away. Actually, I like to use the word died because I feel like euphemisms are not necessarily super helpful in this whole process. But I think one of the frustrating things that happened to us is that, you know, we had to go to a lot of different specialists. He got at one point, his cancer was quite advanced when he was diagnosed. He was stage 4, and he had metastases all over his liver. And so he got radiation at some points. He got obviously 5-FU and leucovorin, and then he was on CPT-11 because that was just coming out. And you know, there were very few options.
Right.
5-FU and leucovorin's been around since the 1950s, which really infuriated me that there wasn't more anything new. So, but you know, the cancer started to march northward. He got lung mets. He then got a tumor behind his eye. So we had to go, as I said, get radiation a separate place, get chemo another place, go to an ophthalmological oncologist. Is that right? In a whole different location, and it was incredibly stressful. And so I think we started the J. Monahan Center at New York Presbyterian Hospital so that someone could be treated holistically, that there are nutritionists there because Jay lost so much weight, as you can imagine. There were geneticists there were psychologists there. There were all kinds of people who could help us navigate clinical trials. It was pretty hopeless in terms of clinical trials for Jay. But it was really a place where you could go and be taken care of and have caregiving at the highest possible level. You know, even people who answer the phone have to be caring, kind people who really treat the person and their entire family as if they treat their own loved ones.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on even our own center, and you know, that first person who picks up the phone doesn't really know the emotion of who's just called.
Yeah.
And you have to be ready to deal with that at all levels, and the whole team needs to be ready for that.
So I think, you know, just walking into the Monahan Center when you're as devastated as we were when Jay was diagnosed would have been so helpful because you feel sort of the collective embrace of the whole center when you walk in, and that was really important. But I think, you know, that is the mandate, and I'm sure it is the mandate among the people here at Georgetown, but it's a relatively new philosophy when it comes to patient care.
Well, it's
and
very hard
so
to
important.
recreate in places other than the cities, right? So no matter what sort of hellhole cities are according to, never mind. is that those are the jewels and some of the jewels in the crowns of cities. And if you're in a rural place or even a neighborhood around here, you don't have that kind of cohesive thing. It's a doc here, it's a doc there, and you can see how quickly one could get lost in cancer care. So creating that model, and we sort of stole some of your ideas as well for here, and but being able to transmit that to others, I think, is a very important thing we need to be doing.
I think, I really feel for oncologists because it's such a tough job. My nephew, Ray Wadlow, is an oncologist here in Northern Virginia. His mom was my sister Emily, who died of pancreatic cancer, who was an amazing person, who was 54. She was running for lieutenant governor of Virginia with Mark Warner, and many people said she would be the first female governor of Virginia. I always thought that would be so cool if I could have interviewed her in that position. And she was really the star of our family, truly. And I had a long talk with Ray about how he helps patients and how he delivers bad news. And it's very emotional and must be very difficult for you all to have to and I so appreciate what you do. But sometimes Ray said he just sits in a room with the family while they cry, and it to me would be the hardest job in the world. But I think it makes such a difference. I've been asked to talk to medical students who are doing their residency at New York Hospital, to talk about what a difference it makes for families to have a compassionate, caring doctor versus somebody who just is so clinical and doesn't want to get too invested. And as hard as it may be for doctors and clinicians, it makes such a difference.
Well, I didn't want to learn the hard way, but I learned the hard way. I thought I was a pretty good doc before Liza got breast cancer, but then when I started to show up as the husband, the caregiver, not a very good caregiver, but the caregiver, I all of a sudden realized that every word that doctor said, everything that happened was just gold, and and had huge impact, and had what I now call the ripple effect. It not only affected the two of us in that room, but affected our kids. It affected the family, and the neighbors and friends and everybody else. So. And how that screwed me up generally is that now I know when I'm delivering one of those little bombs that you have to sit, you have to listen, you have to make sure that they understand it because it's a very important little kernel that you're delivering.
We were talking earlier with Joe about the importance of having someone there. For Jay, I was his advocate. As I said earlier, I think I protected him too much from the truth, but it's so critically important. And I think that most people do want to get the important information in the internet, as we saw in that campaign. I was involved in promoting a campaign with Merck called With Love Me, where caregivers and cancer survivors write letters to their former selves. And I think, but people really do want to have that information. One thing that I was thinking, as I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, is Jay responded to 5FU and leucovorin, and they said it only had a 23% response rate. It's so crazy, I remember this, it was 21 years ago. But nobody told me that you could respond to a treatment and it could be for a short period of time. And that, I thought, was really bad. That someone should have said, your CEA levels, which is the presence of cancer in your bloodstream, right?
Yeah,
is
marker,
that right? Sort of a marker. That it could go down, but then it could go back up again. And I remember feeling so elated that he had responded to the treatment, thinking, oh, we're out of the woods. Yeah. But of course, I think his cancer was so virulent that there was so much of it, and he responded, but it was a very short-lived response.
And we love delivering that good news scan, and we hate delivering the bad news.
And I think people would appreciate if you say, this is good news now, but I just want to tell you, this could be a temporary response.
We always I use the line, you're only as good as your last scan, right?
Yeah.
Doc, how long have I got? But the girls were pretty young, right?
They were, 5 and 1 when Jay was diagnosed, and 6 and 2 when he passed away.
And you talked a little bit about communicating with children. Our kids were, how old were you, Emma? 10. But I don't know, she's out there somewhere. you know, they were young, and we were actually talking about this the other night at the dinner table, and now grown, graduate of this fine institution, was like, you told me you were fine. I just read something in the Arlingtonian magazine that you were going to die, right? That we somehow misrepresented to our children this messaging. And, you know, we've tried to embrace that at the Rouge Center of trying to provide information for children of different ages and what you tell them and the like. How have the girls been, and how are they doing?
Well, you know, I read a lot. I mean, I can't tell you how many books I got when Jay got sick sent to me, which I appreciated, and then how many more books I got when he died. But I read that you have to be honest, but age appropriate. And my mom was actually very wise. She would always say, don't tell kids more than they need to hear or want to hear. Less is more was her big thing. And I think that I was just very honest with them. If they asked me, I remember Ellie saying, is Dad going to be okay? I mean, they were little.
Right.
You know, she was in first grade. And I said, I really hope so. The doctors are trying so hard to make him well. And I was very, very concerned about my kids.
Right.
A little less so for Carrie, because she was so teeny, although I think in retrospect, I wish I had gotten her help when she was a little older to kind of deal with losing her dad. But I had Ellie go to somebody and talk to that person once a week during Jay's illness after he died, and I would go talk to that person. I wanted to make sure she got support, because I think people never regret going to get help. They always regret not going to get help. But I did do something which Cancer Care, which is a great organization, I think they have it in Washington, they have it in New York, which is really focused on helping patients. They recommended I do something called the Worry Cup. And so I asked a Cancer Care volunteer to go to Ellie's class and put a cup in the middle of this circle of little girls. She went to an all-girls school. And they handed them those little plastic gemstones. And they went around the room and they put a gemstone in the cup, and they talked about what they were worried about. And Ellie's teacher, Donna Friel, told me it was the most profound experience she had had in many years of teaching, because it sort of allowed kids to talk about things that were scary or they were worried about. And at that age, it's so hard for kids to feel different. I think it's so hard for kids to feel different at any age, that in a weird way, it kind of normalized what Ellie was going through, because it made clear that everybody was worried about something. And of course, Ellie said she was worried about her dad.
Yeah, it's awfully hard. And it gets even harder when they're, 10, 12, 15. That's a really tough age as well. And sadly, of course, with GI cancers and so many other cancers, we're seeing parents as patients, and or young parents as patients. And so this is an increasing problem that we all face.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought the audience might be interested in learning more about this. As we mentioned earlier, the incidence of colorectal cancer among young people is rising at a scary rate. And we were talking about why and trying to understand that, because the mortality rate among people 50 and over has actually decreased, and only a third of people don't get screened. So compliance with screening has increased, but
that part of the curve is yours.
Well, no,
yes.
I mean, I hope
it's true.
I hope I've contributed to it. But among young people under 50, they are being diagnosed with this disease, and doctors still can't figure out why. So what do you think is going on?
We don't know. That's the hard answer. The papers or others say, oh, it's because we're overweight, we're not mobile, we eat the wrong things. And in point of fact, most of the patients that we see, at least here in Washington, who are under 50 are, as I joke, they're marathon running, cardboard eating people. And so we don't really know why. They didn't do anything wrong. And Ben Weinberg, sitting right there, is studying the idea that it might be the bacteria in our GI tracts, that the microbiome, we somehow may be altering this cohabitant of the planet that we all have inside of us. I like to think of it as a coral reef because it somehow smells better. But this bacteria, this balance within our GI tracts that we now are learning more and more is such an important part of our health that we haven't even been measuring it, right? We in healthcare have been washing it away to study the other half of this relationship, the human side. And so the more we look, the more we're learning about that. But we need to figure this out. What I'm hoping is that money invested in innovative research will end this space and others, that this problem of young people with GI cancers or other cancers will spark the kind of attention that, say, breast cancer enjoyed in the 70s and 80s. And the stuff we figure out will help us figure out major lessons of cancer, right? We're being shown something. And so if we can figure it out, maybe, just maybe, we have a bigger impact than just identifying these young people and reversing it.
Well, I'm super fascinated by this whole new area of research about the microbiome. If you had to explain in very simple terms what you mean when you say the microbiome other than a coral reef, how would you do that?
Well, I joke we should just be eating more dirt.
No, it's actually a little true, believe it or not.
Yeah. So, it's nurses' fault. No, we won't say that. They wash their hands all the time.
So do you guys and gals.
Yeah,
because doctors are women too.
But we have bacteria all around us, in and on us. It changes over time. We can affect it when we're sick. It changes. When we're well, it's different. As we age, it's different. It's been associated with everything from cancer to dementia to the immune system. And I feel like we're just diving under the ocean. The first Jacques Cousteau, anybody old enough to know who that is, to go under and find all these things that we had never known were there. And so the more we look, the more we're finding.
So, and do you think that the issue is that we've overcompensated for bacteria, that we need actually more good bacteria, and that's what probiotics are all about?
Well, so that's still not clear to me, is that if you put it in this way, does it end up there? So it's not great cocktail party conversation.
Yeah,
but
no. And
maybe, just maybe,
weird
the route
fecal
of entry
transplants
needs
and
to be a
stuff?
little different.
Yeah.
But so we don't know, in fact, that if you take it here, that it alters here.
I just think it's so interesting. And do you think that, I think it's so interesting that bacteria in your gut could actually have an impact on mental health issues.
Yeah.
Right? Dementia, but also other mental health issues, right?
Don't let the gun people understand that, because then they'll say it's our microbiome, right? So, sorry. There could be a gun out there.
We were getting a little political backstage.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your latest project, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. So I know you're not stopping. You've still got energy. What are you optimistic about? What are you driving on now?
I love to work. I love the feeling of being productive. So I started a media company. I've done so much in television news. And the way news is covered on television these days doesn't necessarily really speak to me. And I like to really tackle big, thorny issues and try to help educate people about important problems and how they can get involved, or how they can at least become more informed citizens. And so I'm working with sort of a new model, because the advertising model is kind of dying along with sort of the fact that people aren't watching as much television. Those numbers are declining, and digital advertising is very tough. So a lot of brands, I think it was 78% in this Edelman Trust Barometer, 78% of employees these days look to their CEO or company leadership to take a stand on big, important social issues. So you've seen it with Nike, you've seen it with Levi's and gun violence, you've seen it with a whole host of companies. But these companies want people who can tell stories that align with their values. So if a company is really interested in environmental sustainability or criminal justice reform or a whole host of topics, but they don't really know how to sort of get it out into the world and change hearts and minds, that's where I come in, where I help conceptualize digital series, documentaries. I'm working on one about loneliness right now, which is the President Obama Surgeon General called an epidemic. And there's actually a minister of loneliness in Great Britain, but social isolation is a huge problem that is touching all kinds of things. I'm doing executive producing a documentary on plastics, for example, and how our plastics consumption is changing and all the interesting things that are going on there. But I'm working with companies like Procter & Gamble that's really been very progressive and forward-thinking about tackling issues like race and gender equality. And I have a newsletter called Wake Up Call. Text Katie to 474747 if you want to sign up.
474747.
Yeah, and it comes out every morning in your inbox at around 6:15. It's a curation and some original content. And I'm doing just, I think, some really exciting work around all these issues that I care deeply about. And pushing them out. I think 70% of people are now getting their news via social media. So I'm trying to build up my own ecosystem of news, and I hope that people will turn to me as a trusted and credible source in an era where there's so many sources and you don't know who to believe, and people are actually watching the news to sometimes get affirmation instead of information about important topics. So I hope I can be a trusted voice in this very cluttered landscape.
We want your voice out there.
I hope so.
Thank you very much. So I don't know how we're doing it, if we're taking, yes. So we have mics in the aisles. And we'll look for hands or folks who would like to ask Katie. There's one down here. There's one, okay, you got one? Oh, no, the way back, all the way back.
My name is Bob Schmidt, and I had the privilege of starting the Vince Lombardi Foundation after Coach died, and we've contributed to the Cancer Center with a golf and tennis tournament for 25 years to the tune of about $5.5 million that we contributed.
Thank you.
I only say that to reference where I'm coming from. In my checkered past, I was fortunate to build businesses overseas, and I learned early of a dilemma that I think we suffer from today. There's disinformation, there's misinformation, and little information. Katie, how can you help in the process, which I think you're already on the road to help the public understand the difference between those three areas?
That's kind of a tall order.
But if anybody can do it.
I mean, I hear you, and I agree that it's really hard to separate opinion from fact, and I think it's a really challenging time for the media.
I think it's even true in the medical literature. I'm jumping
Really?
in a second because there's not, there are a lot of papers that get retracted. There's data that gets published quickly. We do practice medicine a little bit by press release because of the new order. So even in our world, we have to take caution with, the medical literature.
Well, I think because the news cycle, back in the day, you'd have the Today Show or the evening news or even your local news, and it wasn't 24/7. And I think in order to feed the beast and to really continue to be first and to report news out, that sometimes accuracy is sacrificed. And it's a really tough time. And now you see this proliferation of news outlets. Sometimes I'll read an article on my phone and I'll be like, who are these people? What is this place? I've never heard of this news organization. And of course, you don't know how they're finding their information. You don't know how they're verifying or editing their information or sourcing it. So it is a very, very confusing time. I think the traditional media outlets are trying to do a good job, like the Washington Post and the New York Times. I'm sure people have beefs with the way they're covering it. I think this president makes it really challenging to be objective, given some of the things that he has said and the way he comports himself. I think that's been really challenging for news outlets. So, I can only just impart the information that I think is important, and I think consumers have to be educated customers or educated consumers, like Cy Sims used to say, right? And they have to actually be much more discerning. But it's shocking to me when I watch MSNBC about something, then I watch Fox News, and I feel like I'm living in totally two different countries. And when some of my friends say they watch the BBC because they want a really objective viewpoint, I think we're in some trouble.
Yeah. And in cancer, of course, we have this, it's on a much smaller scale, but the Dr. Google is not it's a dangerous thing. And so we end up spending a lot of our day undoing that from patients. And just to remind everybody, thank you, you did. Just introduce yourself and ask your question, where you're from.
My name is Kemming, and I had the pleasure of seeing you, Katie, at the School of Public Health at George Washington University a couple years ago, and you were kind enough to stick around. And I remember asking you, this is just when Cologuard was being developed, the DNA test.
Right.
And I remember as a journalist, I just wondered if you ever looked into potential financial rivalry between the colonoscopy people who obviously spend thousands of dollars and have staff. Would they try to discourage the efficacy of Cologuard? I think they claim it's 92% effective or something. And you imagine that with DNA research, it will become even more effective. And I remember you said, I'll look into that, which was nice. And I just wonder, have you done, and with the doctor next to you, maybe he could also comment. I know they always say it's the gold standard, blah, 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 for colonoscopy.
Right.
But is it okay for people like me just to use the Cologuard?
Well, I will defer to Dr. Marshall on this, but I do think it's, any screening is an important screening that I always say, I'm not a doctor, that you need to discuss it with your physician. My understanding is that it might be a good first-line screening procedure, but it does indicate, and Dr. Marshall, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe I should just stop talking. I think it indicates if you have cancer in your stools or cells, cancerous cells in your genes or whatever, and whatever.
Maybe
Are you glad I'm not a doctor? Whatever.
Dr. Google.
I'm a little better than Dr. Google.
Touche.
But so that. Will you explain it?
No, no, you're doing fine. So any screening's better than none. Okay, so first off, any screening's better than none. And what Katie's done and what we're all trying to do is close that gap. I mean, I still have people come up to me who I know well and know what I do for a living and say, do I really have to? And I say no, and here's my card, and I have an opening on Tuesday. So first off, it's that. Any screening's better than none. The Cologuard is a fancier version of an old test of just blood in the stool, which got a little fancier, called a FIT test, and this is the next generation. But remember, it needs to be done more often. It's not a every 10-year kind of thing. So they're different. And we're the only country on the planet that uses colonoscopy as the gold standard. Because we can. The rest of the places in the world can't afford that, but we can. So we do it because it's a better test in the sense that it can fix what it finds. But any testing is better than no testing.
And insurance will cover screening colonoscopies. Now, the American Cancer Society, I thought this was interesting, actually lowered their recommendations to 45. And my sister Emily, after Jay died, actually got legislation passed in Virginia that mandated insurance companies pay for screening colonoscopies. So I do believe they're a better test. Does that mean that you shouldn't do Cologuard? Not necessarily, talking to your doctor. But to his question, do you believe that endoscopists and gastroenterologists discourage Cologuard because getting a colonoscopy is better for the doctors and the practices?
I don't think so.
Not to go all Mike Wallace on you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You did CBS for a while, so you get that. No, I really don't think so. I do think there are we are human beings, right? And we are driven by what we do and the skills that we have, and we're proud of those skills, and we get paid for them. And so you can't remove that totally from someone's thinking or decision-making or interpretation of the data, right? So no, has anybody ever come up to me and said that's junk because colonoscopy is better? No. We're still at it's better that we do something versus don't do anything. We can then work out the cost-benefit, risk-benefit ratios and all of those things downstream, but get screened. We have one more up there. I think this may need to be our last question.
Really?
We'll see how quick it is. There's a bar.
Oh, am I standing between you and
No,
Margarita?
teasing. Right there.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for coming out. I know that
Your name and where you're from.
Oh, I'm Christina, and I'm a student at Georgetown. I'm from Maryland, actually. So you mentioned earlier that you started out working at a local news station. And so I think one of the more unspoken problems in our country right now is how local publications and newspapers have been shutting down, kind of an epidemic of that. And so I wanted to hear your take on the importance of local news and in what ways we might be able to resurface it and draw in a more personal conversation.
That's a great question. So first of all, thank you for that. I'd like to introduce Joe Krebs to answer it. I'm kidding. Well, obviously, local news is incredibly important because, as a journalist, you're supposed to speak truth to power, hold public officials accountable, inform viewers. Many people get their news primarily and only from local news. There's a man who's starting a new organization, or I think he's already started it, very much modeled after Teach for America, teaching local journalists and taking kids right out of college and really teaching them these skills. I think it's critically important. I hope that people will be investing in these organizations. And, well, Joe, what do you think? But you can come up here.
Come on, Joe. Come on.
Joe worked at WRC for 32 years. I can't believe it, Joe. Are we that old?
Well, the people who employed me can't believe it either.
But what do you think about local news?
Oh, well, I think it's, as you said, I think it's absolutely critically important because we are the people on the ground who keep an eye on your lives where you live. Your towns, your communities, your local governments, your schools. You wouldn't find out what's going on about those agencies and how your local governments that you elect are performing unless there are local reporters doing local news. Fortunately, in this area, we're very fortunate to have the Washington Post, which does a great job covering local news. We have 4 or 5 TV stations that are financially fine and are doing a good job covering local news. But there are a lot of communities around this country that are really, really suffering. I grew up in St. Louis, and we used to have a wonderful newspaper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I was just home visiting some family members, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch is now basically nothing but wire service stories. They don't have the money to fund good local news coverage, and there are newspapers all around this country, as the questioner pointed out, that are failing. There has to be a new way of doing it, and there are new ways of doing it. There are digital formats that you were mentioning that are coming up and doing sort of hyper-local news coverage.
Like Patch?
Yes, like Patch, although Patch is not doing great.
No, I know.
But that's a concept that ought to be explored more. And it may come down to maybe even the public radio model, where public funding for doing local news coverage is what we're going to have to come to. And so I'm hoping that we explore those kinds of ideas as we go forward, because it's essential.
I agree, and I think consumers have to demand it too. If enough people are raising Cain about it and want part of their tax dollars to go to a model like that, then that's, look at the BBC and how they're funded. It's amazing, and that's because the public demands the news and information, and will pay for quality reporting.
Yeah. Joe, thank you. We have one last question.
I'll make it brief. My name's Dr. Romanosqui. You don't remember me. I didn't have gray hair when I was the intern for your mother at Arlington Hospital.
I was like, did I date you?
I'm a cardiologist here in Washington, D.C., but I'm flattered that you would consider it. There's something that's always bothered me. When I periodically turned on, especially Fox, which I don't do much anymore, I'm inundated by ads for pharmaceuticals, and especially cancer drugs. And I wonder whether or not it doesn't drive demand inappropriately and doesn't actually increase the cost of these drugs. I'm sure they've done the cost-benefit analysis and shown that it's actually productive. I understand the free speech issues, but it seems to me that it would be something that should be limited, if not put aside. I wonder what your thoughts are, the pros and cons in that area.
Well, I haven't thought about it very much, but now I will. Obviously, I see them constantly on television, and I have so many mixed feelings about. I need to be better informed about the high cost of drugs and drug pricing, which I think is a huge problem when a new cancer drug comes out, but very few people can afford it. I have had experience working with companies like Bristol Myers Squibb and Merck, and it seems that there's a lack of understanding about how expensive R&D is for some of these companies to come up with better drugs and better treatments. I don't know. What do you think about
Well, it's a very complicated question, as you know. I mean, we're in the social discourse now of whether we should have the same rules as the rest of the world and be allowed by law, currently we are not, to negotiate price in the United States. And so we are prevented from doing that, which means they can ask for whatever they want. And right now, Medicare and others have just agreed to kind of pay. And the payer is beginning to push back. So it's a complicated world we live in where the delta that is being generated by us is actually going to global drug development. And the rest of the world pays different. And so it is right now a major barrier to cancer drugs. And so, because the rest of the world can't afford these breakthrough medicines in many ways. So it is a perfect question. How much of that, the balance for me is informing patients. Now, I will tell you that there were something like 50 or 60 new cancer drugs approved in the United States over the last just couple of years. And many of them are for very niche diseases. And oncologists, if you've got to take care of everything, can't keep up. There's no way. And so that direct-to-consumer, honestly, is in some ways trying to get to that doc, right? They want the patient to come in and ask the doc, what about that medicine?
Well, like you see Keytruda ads all the time, which is actually, though, a really exciting cancer drug that's showing, as I understand it, again, I'm not a doctor, a lot of efficacy for many cancer patients. So to be able to say, hey, there is this new drug out there that you might want to talk to your physician about, to me is part of the arming patients to be better advocates.
And we are in the business school, so that's their job to figure that out. And we do have colleagues here. So let me close our session and again express my incredible thanks to Katie for coming and spending her time today and visiting us here at Georgetown, and all of you all too. Thank you, Katie, very much.
Thanks for having me.